Happy recording day, Aaron.
Happy birthday, Tim.
It's not my birthday.
Oh, well, that must be our guest.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Dr. Seth. Happy
Happy
birthday
birthday to you. I wanted to have a candle out here and everything too, and like 15 people are just immediately like, what is going on over there? But Dr. Seth, thank you so much for joining us on the show this week and on your birthday, which by the time this episode comes out, your birthday will have passed. But everybody, please wish him a happy birthday in the comments.
How did you two know that it's my birthday?
Magic. Mostly magic.
Was this your research team?
They're pretty thorough. Yeah, one
They're
of
out
them's
of
back there
Quantico,
right
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't let people know where they're from.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
So I think an amazing birthday present for Dr. Seth would be if some of our listeners go to his podcast, Insight Dr. Seth, and subscribe, go listen to one of his episodes. He has an incredible episode with a horse trainer about how that's going to radically change your life.
I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I was floored by the horse trainer aspect. That's really cool, though. Dr. Seth, let's go ahead and let the audience know a little bit about who you are and what exactly, you're a doctor of. I guess we should start there.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Tim and Aaron, for having me. I've been a follower of your podcast. I love your energy. I love what you do. I've watched your podcast and actually kind of wanted to just hang out with you guys. So it's actually great to be with you today. I am a clinical psychologist in Los Angeles and have been a psychologist for about 20 years. I have worked mostly in community mental health for very large institutions to try to help make mental health services more accessible to people. In the past, a lot of times it was people who, maybe just had a lot of money and, they wanted to go to therapy to talk about, maybe problems with their husband or what. The truth is, people have a lot more real mental health problems than that. And a lot of times they don't have the kind of money to pay a private practice therapist. So I have always worked in community mental health because everybody needs help. I've also had a few different jobs as a psychologist, which have given me specialized training. As an example, I worked for a few years on a threat assessment team in Los Angeles where we focused on individuals who may have been at risk for suicide or violence. And so I got a lot of training in suicide prevention, in violence prevention, which was really helpful. And I carried that with me to this day.
Oh my God. So I want to talk real quick. Something that's popped up in a lot of the conversations Aaron and I have had throughout this show, especially in our episode where we talked about the unfortunate loss of life of Judith Barcy. Mental health has been one of those things that people have only recently started taking as serious as a physical ailment. So 20 years into the industry, have you witnessed that change firsthand? People taking mental health as an actual, real circumstance that somebody's going through versus the quote unquote fake science that some people still think it is today?
It's such a great question. I have completely seen a night and day difference with how people talk about mental health just across society, how open people are admitting that they maybe have depression or anxiety or different things, how much more open people are to say, yeah, I went to a therapist once. I mean, 20 years ago, it was not spoken. It was not spoken unless you happen to be in a very kind of particular social circle where maybe it was considered cool, to go see your psychoanalyst or, everybody talks to someone, But
Yeah.
those were very particular social demographics, very educated, very money. Um, Now it is the norm. Now it is much more the norm. There isn't the same stigma. And so it's interesting. I have seen two trends, which I attribute to a big difference in the destigmatization of mental health. Basically, people being more open about talking about it. It's not a shameful thing to say, I actually need some therapy. One is I credit celebrities. This is something I actually credit celebrities for a lot, talking more openly about their own mental health experiences. I'll give you one example. Several years ago, maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago, the singer Justin Bieber posted to,
Yes.
I think it was his Instagram, a picture of him in session with his therapist, okay? And said he was in his therapy session. That never existed in history before. A famous individual being open about the fact that they are dealing with mental health issues. So that sends a message to people everywhere. Like, not only do I not have to be ashamed of it, but also it's kind of cool. Good for me for getting help. Good for me for taking action. And then, of
Hell
course, in
yeah.
addition to celebrities, the pandemic. The pandemic changed everything with mental health. Why? Because almost everybody needed it.
Yes. Yes.
Very true.
Absolutely.
So, one thing that I've talked with a lot of therapists about is the incredible burnout rate in your specific field. So, kind of off the get go, hearing that you've done 20 years of clinical work as a psychologist, you look great. So, you clearly know something that the young bucks walking into this field need to know. How do you personally manage that burnout or emotional exhaustion from working with clients in crisis and even on these threat assessment teams?
Well, that's a tricky question, but let me try to answer it the best I can. I will say this. I have done a few different things working in mental health in my 20-year career, and there's no doubt that the threat assessment position that I worked in for a few years was the most stressful. For me, that would not have been a sustainable uh, position to have for 20 straight years. Why? Because when you're working in high level threat assessment, you are taking calls sometimes at midnight. Sometimes, I mean, you're meeting with teams of, law enforcement on a particular case at all hours. I was, meeting on a street corner, a law enforcement team at 7 in the morning, preparing to do XYZ. You're always on. And so a few years for me on that team, I noticed with my mental health, it's probably a good idea to maybe do a change because it was that would not be sustainable. Now, some therapists, everyone is different. The short answer is you have to know who you are. You have to know what your capacities are, what your needs are for balance. Some therapists can do 40 psychotherapy sessions a week happily and comfortably. Some mental health professionals actually want to see zero clients and zero sessions a week, and they prefer to do research or they prefer to write books. I fall somewhere in the middle. So for me, how I reduce burnout is to know what I need. And I need a mix of different things. I have a podcast. I do clinical work. I like a mix.
Wow. Okay. So a lot of it comes down to understanding yourself, and I feel like a lot of that could be applied to normal, uh, well, it's a little more extreme, right, than just like a person who has a standard, I would say 9 to 5 office job, right? Like you're dealing with people's lives to an extent that you directly impact, their general mental health and quality of life for an X period of time. So yeah, I could see that being very exhausting. And being the person that I am working in the job that I work currently, it makes me think about how many times have I been put in a situation where I directly influence this person's upcoming 10, 15, 30 days of their life? And it can be very stressful. It can be very exhaustive. So definitely take some time, understand who you are, and be able to know what your, I would say, breaking point or your limits are. Now, Dr. Seth, before we continue on, because Aaron and I have a lot of questions for you, it's not very often that we get to sit down with somebody who has an actual field in the area that Aaron and I love talking about on this show. However, I want to take the opportunity right now to let all of our listeners know that if you are listening to us over on Apple or Spotify, you can go check us out over on YouTube. We have the entire video format over there, and you can go see exactly what Aaron is talking about by how Dr. Seth looks so young. He said 20 years in the field. I almost don't believe him. I mean, I do believe him, but I almost don't.
Question is, have I had some work done? Who knows? Who knows? I'm not saying.
Well, if you want to take your opinion and see if Dr. Seth has had any work done, come check us out over on YouTube. Go look at the video. Leave us a comment down below if you think he has. I don't think so personally. And if you also want to go check out Aaron's incredible face, I mean, that thing is sculpted. Or you want to see just how red my shirt actually is, or is it blue? Nobody will ever know. Go check us out over on YouTube. And please consider liking, subscribing the video and or podcast, whatever it is that you're listening or how you want to ingest No Streetlights. Now, I don't want to delay too much longer because Dr. Seth here is a big-brained individual and we have a lot of picking that we need to get into. So let's go back to the show.
Dr. Seth, I know one of the things that I want to talk about here is the commonalities that we share, because you have to have seen some patterns and trends over your 20 years of work. Where is that kind of leading you? What do you think about that?
I love that question, Aaron. What a kind of deep, thoughtful question. I always think when I'm being interviewed, I know a question is a really good question if I don't have an answer immediately, and I actually have to kind of let it marinate. But here's where I'm kind of going. That we are all, as human beings, far more similar than we are different. That we all struggle, I believe, with the same kinds of root issues. And believe it or not, the root issues are so much simpler than probably any of us really want to believe or admit, you know? Maybe we want to tell ourselves, no, my issues are so much more complicated. I have sophisticated issues, right? My problems are extremely complex. Actually, no, it's just that deep down, there's a part of me that's a little 4-year-old boy who sometimes, wants to be taken care of. No, my problem is that I'm angry because I have a chip on my shoulder that something happened as a teenager or when I was younger that I still carry with. Another example, I struggle with the fact that I just don't feel good enough. I don't know why I've got this degree, but I'll never feel smart. I'll always doubt myself when someone asks me something. Did I say that right? Did I answer right? So the commonality that I see is that really it's insecurities that are what hold us back. It's some of the things that we tell ourselves, what we call in the mental health field self-talk. I'm sure you guys have heard this. Some of that negative self-talk, and believe it or not, it's usually reducible to like one of maybe 5 or 6 or 7 core beliefs. I am not lovable. I am not good enough. I am not fill in the blank enough.
I've had this running theory, right? And this kind of ties in. You'll excuse me. Give me the opportunity to get there. I've had this running theory about the people who particularly work in my field. Like, I'm Navy. The job that I hold is called Master at Arms. It's basically base police. Every single person in this field that I have talked to have said to some shape or form that they have had either a broken home or an abusive household growing up. And it started to create this concept of like, what kind of people seek out to do that kind of job? And it was exactly like you said. I felt so much more similar to the people around me than I did different. Because I always thought growing up without a father and a single mother household, I was like, I'm a unique person. You know, things are different for me. And I grew up with this chip on my shoulder until I realized my situation wasn't that unique. And I was in a community surrounded by people who had the exact same similar upbringing that I did. And it really opened up my mind, and it really made me think about why people do what they do. I mean, to boil it down to a simple question that has always gone through my mind is, why do people do what they do? And maybe one day I'll actually dig into really understanding psychology and find out. But I think having intelligent people like you out there, it makes my pondering a little bit easier. I said I would get there. I promised you I would. Ultimately, I just think that we are having a very similar human experience. We just don't realize that because we don't talk about it. We don't break through that barrier and allow ourselves to see that everybody has the same kind of settings. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. You know, when you were talking, I think first of all, that is so psychological what we're talking about, the idea of what psychologically draws a person to a particular kind of career, especially when you're talking about, for example, base police or law enforcement, right? So, you know, one of the things that I think has a lot to do with who we are as adults, with our personalities as adults, with the kinds of relationships we seek out, is how much chaos or how much order we had in our young early life. How much chaos or how much order and predictability. So, for example, and do you know what I said earlier when I said sometimes we may confuse ourselves and think the reason why we are the way we are is super complex reason. Not so. It's actually very, very simple a lot of times. A lot more simple than we want to believe. But
So,
for an individual who maybe felt like there was something in their early life that was out of order. Okay, picture a vending machine, right? And there'll be a sign on it, out of order. Something was supposed to work that didn't work. So for example, you may have felt if you had a parent who should be there, but that was missing in your family picture. You may have felt as a young person that something was out of order. Well, it would make perfect sense psychologically if later in your life, you would make certain decisions where you can enforce some degree of order, predictability, rules, law. That is a way for you as an adult to overcompensate for something being chaotic or out of order in your early life.
damn. I connect with that on such a personal level because that's me. That's my life. It really makes me think too, because talking about it, us growing up, you know, even if there's a slight age difference between us here, we grew up in an environment that externally was not that drastically different. But there's one major thing about today's generation, and I would say over the past 15 years, that could really throw a lot of chaos in somebody's life in unexpected ways. So it makes me really wonder, in your opinion here, how do you think social media is having a
Yes.
significant impact on the mental health of these younger generations? Because that is a whole ocean of chaos that you can only protect your children from to a certain degree. Is this something that you've dealt with already?
I don't think we yet know the ultimate effects of social media on younger generations, how it impacts their identity development. But here's one thing that I'll say that I think indicates that it's probably not cut and dry. It's probably not a black or white effect, which is it's either a bad effect or it's a good effect. I think it's probably a mix. So here's one example. One could make the argument younger generations who follow social media so closely, you could come at it from two different perspectives. If a young person looks to social media and social media influencers, they may be less likely to know what their own identity is. They may be more likely to make random people a deity of sorts. And yet, they may not be as inclined for introspection to think about what they value, who they really are. At the same time, social media allows for individuals to actually post all the time, make videos all the time. And so in some ways it may do you may make the opposite argument that it may encourage a sense of them knowing who they are, that
Mhm.
all the posting, the photographing, the creating online videos may force them to identify who they are, increase self-awareness about who they are in a way that people did not previously when there was no social media. So I think it's probably a mix.
It's almost like
There's
having access to a journal, but it's more of a public journal. That's
Yeah.
interesting, yeah. 'Cause I've been a huge supporter of journaling. I think it helps people organize their thoughts, and truth be told, Twitter works exactly the same way. You post what's on your mind, and if you're a person who is habitually posting on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, right? You are essentially journaling for the world to watch. Yeah, that's super fascinating, and also the idolization that comes from seeing these social media stars and taking into account, like, I wanna be just like X, Y, or Z. Yeah, you could really shape your entire personality and have no clue who you really are until the point you actually just become a mini version of whatever celebrity you idolize. That's fascinating.
I would like to make the point, though, that I do think there is value in us taking a moment to talk about introspection. When
Mhm,
you talk, Tim, about journaling, writing in a journal is very different than anything that happens with creating videos, for example, and posting them online. Writing in a journal, it's a very private
mhm.
experience. One is in a state of introspection, looking into the self and writing down and expressing their own thoughts. It's almost like a little sanctuary of sorts. When a person writes in a journal, it is a very private experience. There is depth there. There is reflection. You can argue it's almost a type of a meditation, looking at your feelings and thoughts from above in aerial view. I believe introspection is crucial to one's development, to one's mental health. A lot of times it takes us going inward, a little introspection, pausing, taking a step back from social interactions to even know, how do we feel about something? What do we really think? For me, I have to go off into a space of quiet. Okay. And I'll share something that Oprah Winfrey has said that I love, love, love. And that is, if I ever need to really know how to make a big, important decision, I find the quiet, because it's only in the quiet that I can ultimately know what my decision should be. Now, that kind of thing can happen with journaling because journaling is a quiet, deep, introspective experience. Part of the risk with social media is that media and posting and the creating of videos and posting them, it is not a private,
Mhm.
introspective experience always.
Yeah, it can invite a criticism from a person from the exterior right? So rather than sitting there and having that introspection, and just to make it clear to all of our listeners here, I don't think actually going to social media and trying to use it as your journal would be a good idea. As Dr. Seth just said, journaling is more of an introspection. Social media is, well, it's for socializing, right? If you do happen to go to social media and you want to start posting all of your thoughts, you're inviting people to criticize, critique, and add their own input to the point where that thought might not even be yours by the time people are done with it. I mean, anything can go viral. So
Yeah, and I would really argue that we're trying to portray a better version of ourselves, so it's not truthful what's going on social media. I'm not
yeah,
sharing that my back hurts and I'm sad and I'm tired. I'm I'm embodying this exuberant side of myself that's so excited to be in this conversation instead of like laying on my floor and complaining that my back hurts while my dogs lick my face. So definitely take what's going on social media with a grain of salt.
yeah,
Find the quiet, like Dr. Seth said. I would highly recommend, like Tim, pick up a journal, write down, if you have low self-worth, like Dr. Seth was talking about, write down all the things you did today. Even if you survived, write what you survived today. I had these thoughts and emotions, but I'm still here.
I have my wonderful journal here with a no streetlight sticker. If anybody wants to journal in a no streetlights journal, let us know in the comments.
Tim has explored one of his thoughts. So if you'll allow me, Dr. Seth, do you think I could pitch you something?
Bring it.
The most I ever hated somebody.
Mm.
I really had to go into a deep space in myself to try and understand that. Because recently I've been exploring if I hate something or if something hurts, I try and really dive in to understand it. So this was kind of my first foray into that world. I absolutely hated this person because it was my perception that they had always had it easy. They had never really been challenged. So they thought that that's how life should be and they shouldn't have to do things they didn't want to do. And that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of understanding positive versus negative entitlement, which a lot of people don't realize that there are those two sides to entitlement. There's things have always been easy, so they should continue to be easy. Or the one that we often use as a crutch is things have been really hard for me, so now things should be easy. And really, we're not entitled to any outcome, so we all have to put in the work. What are your thoughts there?
Boy, that's interesting. I think that, let me think about it for a second.
Of course.
Any question you want to ask me on that to help me sort of frame how I might think about responding?
Sure. So the next sentence that I would add to that for more context is what we hate in others is often what we hate the most in ourselves. And I kind of
Got it.
detached myself from this person because the thing I struggled most with was negative entitlement, and this person had positive entitlement. So I didn't realize
Got it.
that we were both dealing with the same thing because it looked a little different.
Right. What you're talking about, Aaron, is really interesting because, at root, you started by talking about the word hate. And hate is a really complex topic. Actually, we talked about hate recently on my podcast. And here's the quick question. Is hate a feeling? What would one of you guess? Is hate a feeling?
No,
No.
Okay, then what would you say hate is, Aaron?
it's a concept more than a feeling.
Concept
Yeah, I can feel angry.
is
I can feel sad.
okay. So concept is concept a set of what? Thoughts?
Thoughts or ideas.
Concept sounds like algebra. So, okay, but let's clarify this though, because this is really important in helping us understand when those feelings of hate can come up in us. So, Aaron, you're saying that hate is a concept. Let me reflect this back to you. When you're thinking about the person that you used to really hate, is that what it felt like when you thought about how you felt towards that person? Did it feel like concept? That
It
sounds
sure
so
didn't.
abstract and intellectual. So what did it feel like when you felt that hatred? What did it feel like?
It was a deep, burning rage.
Okay. And rage is a type of feeling. That's what is so fascinating about feeling hate. It feels like a feeling. It feels like an emotion, right? But it's a very complex emotion. Feeling hatred, it's a very complex emotion. Why? Because it's linked in with some belief. It is a mix. Feeling hate is a mix of both emotions and beliefs, I believe. So, what is the belief? A lot of times, when you look at anyone you may feel hate for in a moment, a lot of times part of what's driving your hate is that you feel like they should be different. They should have been different. They should not have been the way they were. They should not have done what they did. There is a very strong belief that any of us has in a moment when anyone causes us to feel that level of hate. So you have to look, Aaron, at sort of beliefs that you have when you're thinking about the person that you talked about feeling hateful of them. Out of curiosity, and I'm not asking you to share who that was, did you feel that individual should have done something differently? Should have been different in any way?
More so been different. I detested that it seemed to me that they didn't have the capacity to kind of step outside of themselves and see how what they were doing was affecting those around them. It was all about them.
You would have liked to have been able to change that person. Is that fair to say? If you could, if you had that superpower?
If I had superpowers, yes. With my regular powers, I just wanted to slap them. So let's presume I had superpowers.
Right, right. Ideally, you probably, underneath you feeling hateful towards that person, was probably you wishing that you could control how they were, that you had more control, and you couldn't control the fact that they can do this, they can be who they are, and there's nothing you can do. So feeling helpless, like, well, there's nothing I can do, feeling helpless, that's awful. We often prefer the really our feeling of anger is emotion that a lot of times people love because they feel strong and empowered. It can also be controlled. Now, part of learning to deal with any resentment is getting to a place in the process of grieving, right? Where you reach the last stage. What is the last stage of grief, Tim or Aaron?
Acceptance.
Amen, Tim. That's right. Now, it's really, really hard to accept certain things, right? Especially when we feel hateful towards someone that really hurt us. Could have been a parent that we feel like should have been there for us. Sorry if people aren't just able to just say, you know what, come to a place, a Zen space in my heart, and I accept it. That's very difficult. And yet, sometimes that is what goal we must work towards. We may not be there now, but we can always keep our eye on the fact that that is the place of acceptance that we need to get to. Because when we are in our highest selves, our adult selves, we don't feel hateful because we accept that when we don't like certain things, we can't order the world around us. We just can't order it.
So that's really bringing up in me one of the episodes that really challenged Tim and I was our episode about Judith Barcy, because we had to spend a lot of time talking about this person who annihilated their family. And after we published that episode, one of my very close friends who's dealt with a lot of pain throughout her life said, "Thank you for sharing so much about Joseph, because I didn't realize that he had survived these awful, horrible things during the Hungarian Revolution that left him deeply scarred and forever warped his psyche to where he had to engage in all these externalizing and controlling behaviors." So, if I have to make this into a question, it would be, how do we pull back from going down that road of externalizing and controlling and kind of wallowing in the anger and the hate and move forward into that adult forebrain executive function you're talking about, and accepting, like, yeah, some people suck, or like that's what they're going through, or that's their journey.
I think part of what you're talking about at root is a really existential question, which can be explained in very simple words, which is, what do I have to do to have a happy, decent life? How do I have to be to enjoy my life rather than let all the constant interruptions hold me back? So a lot of Buddhists will say that happiness is in the moment, is in the present. So I say to myself a quote that I came up with, which is, happiness is right now or it's never. That's what I have learned so far in my life. My whole life was always about the delay of gratification, that one day I will be happy. First, it's, once I graduate with my doctorate, then finally I'll be happy, because then finally I'll be able to start working as a doctor. Well, then after 5 years, I'm in dues paying positions for the first few years. And maybe when I'm 40, then I will be happy. I kept pushing that line in the sand back, right? I was the saddest example of, I was never happy in a moment because I always wanted bigger things. It was never enough, this insatiable desire. So one of the things that I think a lot of older people learn in life, if you ask a lot of 80-year-olds what it takes to be happy, they will give you a very different answer than 30-year-olds or 20-year-olds, or God forbid, a 15-year-old. Ask a 15-year-old what you need.
Followers on Instagram.
That's right. Ask a 15-year-old. Ask my daughter at 15 what you need to be happy. It will be so different than someone at 80. And that's because for so many of us, it takes a lot of life experience to figure out the answer to the question, what actually makes me happy? So to come back, Aaron, to your question and what you're talking about, I believe that good mental health in this life, that focusing on what matters, is really about always being clear each morning, each afternoon, each night about what matters most to you in life. And maybe it's just things that you can count on 5 fingers. Maybe it's things like that I have my health, that I'm grateful for the health that I have. I mean, I know some individuals that are paralyzed in different ways or don't have certain physical capacities, and they still manage to be happy. Boy, that's my goal. So it's health. It's that maybe I make a contribution in this world. I do something in my professional life that can add or make someone's day better. Maybe it is about that I am a good father. That my goal is that when my kids are 40, that they're not having to go to therapy to talk about how I messed them up. Do you see what I'm talking about? It has nothing to do with what job I have, the title. It has nothing to do with how much money I have. What I just said has nothing to do with one word. And that one word has 3 letters, starts with an E, ends with an O. The stuff that matters the most to me today comes down to one word, and it has nothing to do with this word. Aaron, can you figure out what that word is?
The only letter I can think of to fill those 2 vowels would be a G, ego.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So I, at 50, it's my birthday today, at 51 years old. This is the first time I'm having to publicly disclose my age. 51 years old.
23 years old.
Hell, 20, no, make it 27, be more realistic.
27, okay.
You have a fully developed brain,
listen,
27, yeah.
But so for me, at 51 years old, I have learned what matters the most and where I try to focus my mental energies each day. It can't have anything to do with my ego. It can't have anything to do with power, prestige, status. Ego is like the root of so much of our conflicts. us wanting to be right, us wanting to preside, have our way be better. So I think that, Aaron, the more we do that in our lives, the better we are. Now, you'll find needle pointed on a lot of pillows in some grandmother's living room. Choose your battles, things like that. Sometimes, sometimes there's a reason why some of these things are needle pointed on so many pillows.
Yeah. Oh my God. Dr. Seth, there was probably like at least 8 points within what you just said where it was like, it felt like something had opened up in my brain. Let me make sure I word this correctly. Have you ever realized that there was a concept that you understood but never have put into words before, and then you hear somebody else say it and you're like, well, duh, of course, it's always been like that, but you've never actually said it like that? A lot of what you just said was to me. I was like, yeah, of course. Ego, get rid of it. What is that even doing in this conversation? Wham! But I've never put that into words before. I mean, I've understood the concept of like choose your own battles, especially being active duty. There are definitely locations where you need to choose your own battles. I am not going to be getting into a screaming match with somebody who outranks me, especially if it involves any junior sailors or whatever around me, right? But yeah, no, there's just mic drop. Good job. This is why you're the professional. Very
There
beautifully
was a
put.
reason.
Thank you.
There was a reason I got out of bed today.
And it was
It was
not anything to do with ego.
Or my birthday.
So I think if it's all right with you, we'll do like an anecdote palate cleanser before we get back into wherever we were going before we had our minds blown.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are going to be really interested to hear a seasoned and experienced psychologist who worked on a threat assessment team. You have a whole episode of your podcast about psychopathy and psychopathic traits. So could you provide an example of a case where your work in threat assessment helped prevent a potential crisis? Of course, without violating confidentiality.
One of the things that I can do in order to sort of protect confidentiality is to talk about some of the most common things that one sees when they're doing threat assessment. And a lot of times there are certain warning signs that someone may show if they are at risk of committing violence. So a lot of times there is a preoccupation with weapons. There is incredible knowledge around weapons, interest in weapons. There is, as almost a hobby, a fascination with wars and weaponry. So they have an incredible amount of knowledge for it. And also they begin to acquire, they begin to acquire different types of weapons and firearms. Now, a lot of times, one of the things that one will ask in threat assessment is trying to be aware of whether packages are being delivered at home. A lot of times, someone may start stockpiling certain weapons that actually get delivered. And, it's not always clear when a package is delivered what's in the package. So if you start having, fears about someone and some behavior and, they start talking about some threatening language or behavior that you're worried about, and they start having a lot of packages delivered. This is something that there may be value in trying to understand better what packages are being delivered to home. Now, a lot of times there's something called leakage. And what that is someone who might be in the beginning stages of thinking about doing something violent. They might leak some information and share it with someone in their life. They might start saying things to suggest, well, they had a thought about ... about doing something or hurting someone. A lot of times there are acts that are committed on certain dates, what's called anniversaries. Like, there may be a date on the calendar that means something to this individual. So they're thinking about that date. And they may show some leakage and actually start talking a little bit about that date. So those are some warning signs. A lot of times, an individual will start researching online about information, places where they might start having thoughts about doing something violent, groups of people that they might start thinking about doing something violent. They might also seek out chat rooms or social groups where they know those individuals tend to be similar and like-minded and thinking about other violent acts. They may be radicalized in some way. A lot of times, individuals who commit really serious violence will have an underlying ideology. The ideology is actually a risk factor. They may believe people shouldn't, and then fill in the blank. So they may engage in violence to teach someone or a group of people their lesson that they do not condone something or condone certain behavior. A lot of times, individuals who engage in violent behavior will not do searches online at Google or at Bing or any other popular search engine. They will actually download a special browser, internet browser, where they can access the dark web.
Right.
And it is in the dark web where a lot of times people seek out individuals who are like-minded and who are thinking about negative plans. Those are some examples.
Working in threat assessments, having access to this kind of information, such as like what their search history and items being delivered to the house and packages and stuff, is this stuff that you have access to, or is this stuff that you have to rely on the word of the individual being assessed?
That is such a great question. So the truth is, no one can necessarily get all the browser history for any individual, right? Now,
course.
sometimes a judge may actually sign off on all the documentation to try to obtain that information. That is not easy to do. It is
Yeah.
not easy to get an individual's phone records. It is not easy to get an individual's browser history. So oftentimes, we do rely on the self-report of the individual. So someone in law enforcement or a mental health professional trained in threat assessment will ask someone they're really concerned about, where do you go online? Tell me some of the websites. And there are specific websites that are known for particular activities that these individuals will go to and affiliate with other individuals who are thinking about violent acts. So the individual doing the assessment will ask, have you ever downloaded a browser where you can access the dark web? Where do you go on the dark web? Now, the individual may or may not tell the truth. That's the problem.
Do you find that, I mean, being a certified mental health professional, I'm assuming you've had the opportunity to have asked these kind of questions. Do you find that the ego involved in like this person's potential violent act that they're going to commit, like this thought that they're the one who's going to make the change in whatever it is that they believe, do you think the ego shines a little bit in these conversations to where they almost want to brag about what they're planning? Or do you feel like they're trying to really hide?
For individuals who commit violence in any kind of mass level, right? So we're talking about there's violence where one may commit a homicide towards one individual. And
Yeah.
then there's violence where one may commit physical harm to more than one person on a mass level. Now, there is a range of causes for what causes an individual to engage in mass violence like that. There is not one diagnosis that each one of those individuals who commits mass violence has. There may be multiple mental health diagnoses, and we must learn as much as we can about the individual in retrospect, oftentimes, to try to understand what the motive was. Now, for example, with the Las Vegas shooter, the FBI released a report and it was not clear what the motive was for that behavior, which
Right.
is really interesting. Now, a lot of information about that case was revealed, but it's not clear to me what amount of information was withheld. Was
Mhm.
there a motive? We don't know in that case what the motive was. Was there a mental health diagnosis? Well, we would need medical records in order to show that. And a lot of times, medical records are protected and confidential. So we don't have access to that.
Yeah, they're very difficult to get. I mean, that makes sense. Do you feel, I'm sure the answer to this is a yes, but I'm hoping you can expand on it. But early intervention in these situations where there's a risk assessment or threat assessment prevention situation going on, do you feel like the earlier the intervention, the better it'll turn out? Or what role do you think that has in it?
When we come across an individual in society who may be at risk for serious violence, for causing serious violence toward others, the greatest hope we have is to connect them with services where they can receive supervision and mental health treatment to help reduce the
Mhm.
urges to commit that behavior. And I said connect to mental health services and treatment. That word connect is incredibly important. Individuals who are connected to individuals who are caring and love them, and they have close, open, emotional, intimate relationships, will be less likely to engage in serious violence. Can all violent behavior be prevented? We don't know the answer to that. But there is a tremendous amount of effort in the United States, for example, to try to identify individuals who may be at risk earlier and link them to services so that they don't feel compelled. Now, I will just share one of the greatest problems with threat assessment is that you may identify an individual that you really are concerned may be at risk for committing serious violence. Now, what does one do? Does one try to incarcerate them? Well, they haven't committed a crime that allows them to be incarcerated.
Mhm.
Can you put them on an involuntary psychiatric hold, what we call a 5150? Well, they aren't gravely disabled. They are not reporting significant suicidal intent, ideation, means, and plan. They
Right.
aren't expressing homicidal ideation imminently. See, the law says there must be an imminent risk.
Yeah.
So you do realize how challenging this is. There may be a risk there, and yet the civil rights do allow for the protections of an individual to say you can't just incarcerate or hospitalize someone because you think in the future they may do something.
So,
Yeah, that's a very difficult thing. Sorry, Aaron.
no, please.
It's a lot to process, especially having seen these things firsthand. And like I've heard the question so many times, and it hurts me whenever this gets brought into it, but or brought into an investigation. But sometimes the question will pop up is, do we have to wait for something to happen before we can intervene?
100%.
Hurts.
100%. It should not have to be in retrospect, right?
Yep.
That we try to better understand what causes someone to commit mass violence.
Hmm.
And yet, we do have to deal with the fact that individuals have civil rights in the United States.
Of course. Of course. Wow.
So, a lot of platforms have fun talking about these extreme cases, but really, mass violence or even extreme violence is pretty rare. And I think the thing that's affecting most people that we need to kind of gravitate towards is so many of us are struggling on a much quieter scale
Hmm.
with just not only the burnout that we brought up on the onset of this conversation, but just the deep well of sadness of, I'm not enough, I'm not doing enough. So, are there things we can really do to affect the most people in our lives who are fighting these silent battles of just not feeling adequate or lovable, those six things that you mentioned earlier?
the number one takeaway that I hope that listeners would get from everything I'm saying today is the word connect. Connect. The more people connect on a real and emotional level with individuals in their life, the better their mental health will be. The less isolated they will feel, the more understood they will feel, the more they will feel that there is a belonging. They are a part of something. Someone knows them. Someone understands who they are. You know, if I run into someone I know at the market later today and I ask someone, how are you doing? They will almost reflexively say, I'm good. Well, most of the time, many of them are not good, right? Now, in the market, we're not going to break down and confide just how bad things may be for any one of us that particular week, but that is the goal. So each one in the listening audience, ask yourself, how are you feeling today on a 1 to 10 scale? Where are you? 10 is happy and 1 is in a really bad place. What is your number? Okay. Now, the next question is, if your number is a negative number, if you are in a bad place, if for more than a few days you have felt stressed, or you have felt blue or down or depressed or just irritable, like you could just snap, you're just not in a good place. Who knows in your life? And what my invitation to every listener would be, tell one person today, you just feel like you're not doing so good lately. Just 1%. Because a lot of times we are as sick as our secrets.
Ooh.
A lot of times when we are struggling, it's actually a secret. The number of people that even live in our houses with us that might not actually know we're struggling. So tell them, you don't have to talk about it for 10 minutes. And here's one way to do it, to say, I don't want to get into a huge discussion about it, but to be honest, I do got to tell you, like, I'm not, like, the last couple of weeks, I'm not doing so good. And just drop.
I'm so grateful for the people we have listening to this conversation, because that right there is such a massive change. So manifesting, I'm so glad that the million people who just heard that heard it. Because if you just tell one person, I mean, so many of us can think of a time when we opened up and shared, I'm not doing great. And it almost cracks through the entire shell, your whole facade, the mask is gone, and you almost break down and cry because you're willing to admit that you're going through something, which is extending grace and love to yourself, which is something we don't do nearly often enough.
That's right. And a really simple thing that we can all do that many of us don't want to do is ask for help in the tiniest little ways imaginable. So I'll give an example. Yesterday, I always in my family cook dinner. Last night, I asked my daughter, honey, will you do me a favor? Would you heat up dinner for us tonight? I had everything made from the weekend, but I'd had a tough, long, intense day. I was just done. And I asked her, would you do me a favor and get dinner ready for us tonight? I needed that, but I needed to ask for help. And it made me feel less alone, more a part of something, more a sense of belonging. I am in a family. I am not alone. It is not all on me all the time. Asking for help in that little way was good for my mental health last night. Now, another thing that, do you know what is missing in so many people's lives? A hug. Ask someone,
Yes.
and you may not be the personality to do this. You are the person who needs to do it the most then, to say, could I ask like a really weird favor? Can I just get a hug? Do you know how good that 10-second hug is for an individual's mental health? Makes them feel like it's okay for 10 seconds just to ask for help. So to have a little 10-second breakdown, to feel physical warmth. So ask for help in the tiniest little ways. It's huge.
Listen, I want to point out a couple key things that I'm taking away from this conversation today, Doc.
Break it down, Tim. Break it down for us.
Look, talking about the ego and how that is essentially the root of all of our more complex and sometimes negative in nature thoughts. Break down the ego. We are as sick as our secrets. Oh, that gave me chills. That gave me chills. And asking for small things. Like those are massive to me. And those are three things that I know for a fact I can implement into my day-to-day life. And I guarantee you there are listeners who can take that information and look at their own life and what's going on and say, I should break down my ego a little bit. I should ask for a little bit more help, because there have been days where I go out and I look at the trash needs taken out, the dishes need done, food needs cooked, and I just ask my wife if she'll help me with one of those three things. My day gets instantly better. So,
That's right.
Dr. Seth, we have been on this episode now. We're coming up to our time frame. I would be doing a massive disservice, not only to you, but also to our audience, if we didn't tell them exactly where they can find you and where they can find your podcast. And please plug as much of your social medias as you want, because I want people to see you, hear you, and find your incredible information, because they need someone like you in their lives.
Thank you so much, Tim. And thanks, Aaron, for having me. I really appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing here today. I love your energy and your openness, and you just make me and I think everyone feel comfortable. If people are interested in my podcast has a similar vibe, but really focuses almost exclusively on all things psychological. We talk about relationships, work stress, family, all the stuff, how to do life better, how to gain insight into our life so that we can do life better. My podcast is called Insight with Dr. Seth, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and I'm on YouTube. I have a co-host, Jeannie, for many of the episodes, and we have long-form interviews on topics that I think are really intriguing for everyone to hear. You can also check out our Instagram, Insight Dr. Seth Podcast. And I'm Dr. Seth Myers. It's been wonderful spending time with you both today.
Thank you for sharing.
Happiness is right now or never, Aaron. Sorry, you got to take it from the top again. Just wanted to say happiness is right now or never. Okay.
The happiness is now or never. Don't worry. This is the most common occurrence on this show. It's me doing 30 takes. So, Dr. Seth, thank you so much for sharing your vast experience, your incredible insights, your precious time. Thank you for connecting with us, because according to my good friend, Dr. Seth Myers, that's the one thing we need to really improve our life right now, today, is to connect with each other. So, thank you.
I want to go ahead and give a huge thank you to all of our listeners. If you've made it this far into the episode, our show runs because you guys show out every week and you're here to enjoy what we're bringing to you. Sometimes it's not a happy conversation, and sometimes we get into some real dark things. But when we bring on people like Dr. Seth over here, he's able to show us the tools and be able to break things down for us that Aaron and I, sometimes we can't do. We're not trained medical professionals. We say it every episode. And I just want to remind you all again, really quick here. If you need help now, please call 911 or text or call 988 for immediate intervention.
Now, what Dr. Seth said, you can take to the bank. He is a doctor. Listen to Dr. Seth. Go check out his podcast. If you don't have a Dr. Seth in your area, feel free to use betterhelp.com/NSLP. You deserve to get the help you need. You really, truly are worthy of that. So if you need it, that resource is there. But in the meantime, be good to yourselves and each other.
We love you.
So take a breath, you're right on time. No street lights, but we're finding our way. In the dark, but we've got something to say.